have a tendency to be able to fight off infection. But if you're giving someone a large enough dose of a pathogen, let's say E. coli, all right, or SARS-CoV-2, you're gonna get sick. The question is, how famous are they, they're going to cease. So we're talking about in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of papers that show pictures of viruses. All right, so, and that paper alone has 20 pictures that show, and they don't look like exosomes. And not only that, the whole exosome is the virus, doesn't hold water when you do a chemical analysis. Now, someone would say, well, what about, there's sometimes in these exosomes, and Dr. Bowman mentioned this, sometimes you have DNA that's endogenous to the cell. And when that cell is, going in necrosis or some sort of cellular problem, things aren't working right? And certain things could get packaged in that Golgi apparatus and brought out as an exosome. That doesn't mean that exosomes are viruses. It's just saying that the cell is perturbed and not packaging correctly in the Golgi apparatus. So, now with SARS-CoV-2, the trained theorists would say, well, if viruses never been isolated, and and it's really just some sort of endogenous process that's causing a disease. Why are we spending billions of dollars in the United States for weapons development? BSL-4 labs, and by the way, they have left. All right, and this is documented. So if viruses don't exist, then why does BERT-CB show a weapons development of SARS-CoV-2, and not SARS-CoV-2? Fauci gave him $1 million on April of 2001. And in 2002, SARS pops up in China. Now, so I want to be clear, I'm not saying every virus is man-made. All right, and maybe Dr. Bowman can agree that not every exosome is a virus. All right, but SARS-CoV-2 was Barrick playing in the laboratory with modern. And that we have a paper in 2008 that Dr. Shi published that shows that she developed a chimera plasmid, mixed it with pseudo-HIV, and that the human ACE2 showed from bats. If viruses didn't exist, she wouldn't be able to take pieces of bat SARS-like and pieces of SARS and put it into a plasmid, and then in the 293 stem cell line, create this monstrosity. And then do further development of Barrick with the serial passage. And the serial passage led to further development and lethality of SARS-CoV-2. The trained theorists would say, this is all hocus pocus and big pharma and all this. And it's all a big lie, and it's only exosomes. And I'm like, then why are we spending a lot of it? We're spending billions and billions of dollars on exosome development, even though there's no proof that an exosome actually equals a viron of any type. And then go prove it and say, oh, when you do a sequence of these particular virons, we can't, through BLAST. That's an algorithm, that's an in silico, and it's never been isolated, and that we can't believe it. But yet when you compare it to Sanger, that doesn't use any, Sanger is a method, an older method, and you compare the BLAST to Sanger, it equals. BLAST has been invalidated. The algorithms have been invalidated by a method that uses no computer. So that doesn't hold water either, that argument. Now, when people say that SARS-CoV-2 was never isolated, yes, it was. And I'll tell you the date. It was December 26, 2019 in China, and it was published in Nature. And you can download that from the NCBI. Now, the traders would say, that's a cabal, you can't believe anything then. You can't believe that. All right, if you can't believe the Chinese doing it, you can believe that if you get SARS-CoV-2 and you test positive through the antigen test or through the PCR test, and they need to figure out what variant you have, let's say alpha, beta, gamma, delta, or omicron, how would they do that? What they do is they take the remaining part of that sample and actually run a sequence. And then they would know what variant you have. In definition, it's been isolated in the sample. So there is not only that, if you look at papers like the one that I just mentioned, that was published this year in March, that shows the electron microscope of pictures of SARS-CoV-2 docking to ACE2. They tell you the isolate they used to show it. Not only that, there was a paper that was published last year, I think it was mid last year, that was showing in autopsy data that SARS-CoV-2 hides in adipose tissue around your heart and communicates with the macrophages. In other words, there's a reservoir in fat cells. So once you get SARS-CoV-2, you can't get rid of it. And this is part of the reason why we end up having the myocarditis. If you look at papers like the one that I just mentioned that was published this year in March, that shows the electron microscope of pictures of SARS-CoV-2 docking to ACE2. They tell you the isolate they used to show it. Not only that, there was a paper that was published last year, I think it was mid last year, that was showing in autopsy data that SARS-CoV-2 hides in adipose tissue around your heart and communicates with the macrophages. In other words, there's a reservoir in fat cells. So once you get SARS-CoV-2, you can't get rid of it. And this is part of the reason why we end up having the myocarditis. And it isn't so coincidental that from 1986 to 1995, Barrick was using beta coronaviruses and studying myocarditis. There's a lot of dots that are connecting that points right to Barrett's lab and the development of viruses as a weapon system.
That's your 10 minutes?
Yeah,
So I would like to hear a response from Dr. Mehta.
So there's a lot to tease out with this. How much time do I have for the
Well, 5 minutes, but if you went over 10 minutes, which we'll call just you telling your story in 5 minutes, and you're still at a point, well, that should be fine.
Okay, all right. So one of the issues is when we get caught up in these studies, but we don't look at the methodology. One of the things I mentioned was that there are lookalikes when taking images. For example, I mentioned extracellular vessels, not just exosomes, micelles, microvilli, plasma-coated triskelions, somatids, and other breakdown products that are being studied. The problem is that the samples have to be sliced and altered in fixation processes. So there hasn't been proper control studies done to say that these artifacts that have been removed from a living body, that have been sliced and put light on them and stained and squashed and so forth, are actually what's happening in the living body. So that's the first problem, because if you want to say that this is what's happening, you need to prove it inside the living tissue and correlate that as such, and that has not been done. None of the viruses have been isolated. A virome is not a virus. A viral package or something that has a sheath or a coating is not the virus. The virus should be able to be characterized, measured, weighed, and taken away from the protein code, or the glycoprotein code, and described properly, which has never been done in any paper. They have to prove then through cautious postulates and or the altered rivers postulates that those are actual disease-causing agents. And I'll go back to the paper that Dr. Cottrell mentions, the first paper, which even states inside the paper that cautious postulates were never satisfied and requirements were not met to prove that this was caused. And actually made big scientifically the assumption that that was the disease-causing agent. So the proper isolation process is not done. It's not taken directly from a sick patient. They took samples that are cultured in foreign animal cells that are added with fetal bovine serum mixture, antibiotics, and other chemicals, and they starve the cells. And then I read all the papers from SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, and not one paper gives detailed methodology on how they culture their virus or attempt to purify and separate the assumed virus particles by ultracentrifugation or filtration from the cell culture soup. So even one of the SARS papers like Bouchier, for example, they said that they satisfied the last three Rivers criteria for themselves. They used unpurified Vero cell culture supernames, and they inoculated two macaques while they observed them for 6 days. One of the macaques developed respiratory distress, and one of the two had different levels of lung damage at autopsy. One was severe and the other was not severe. Both macaques were lethargic and developed a temporary skin rash, but none of those are symptoms of SARS, and they only had 2 of these as a sample size. And if you look at all the sample sizes in the experiments done, they're very low sample sizes, which don't satisfy the scientific method, rigorous, understanding of what's really going on. Because we can talk about pictures all we want, but pictures do not prove that it's a virus and that it causes a disease in a host. It's assumption and so logic. And this is the problem that the terrain understanding tries to present again and again, and it's always sideswiped by, we have all these papers, so therefore it's valid. It doesn't matter, you can do a million papers, but if your premise and your methodology is incorrect, all those ideas are just people messing around with cells and culture tissue and blending it with other stuff and looking at it under a microscope and thinking they know what's going on in the human body and they understand disease and disease transmission. But if you don't do proper rigorous experiments, then all you're doing is make work projects where you're making these theories, but not validating the theories. And what we're asking and trying to help the conventional thinkers really focus is real straight and emergency services to understand that this is not what's happening in the living tissue. So the cautious postulate is not being fulfilled as a problem, but there's an altered Rivers criteria, and it has to be pandemic for the virus theory to work. So he introduces the concept of virus carriers, for example, instead of just a virus. So let's say we have viruses in our body, they're all over the place, and they're supposed to infect the cell, replicate many times, and then explode the cell, and leave the cell and go into other cells. But we don't have the process by which the cell is said to now go from the virus goes from something dead into something living, goes inside the cell, does that process. It should be very easy to just find a sick person, look under the microscope, if you will, without any kind of staining, just simply, or try to take the sample and make someone else sick by purifying through proper filtration methods. But that hasn't been done. And Dr. Sakalanka did the controls, so the controls have to be very specific because you have to have a negative and a positive control. So you have to make sure that when you're mixing, changing, staining, and doing all those processes, that you're not actually damaging the sample or creating a plethora of different kinds of cell conglomerates inside that tissue sample. And if you can't, if you don't take the cell material without viruses or without your fine run or whatever, do the same staining, chemical addition techniques and compare and contrast the two, then you're just making assumptions and running off with false baseline theory. So you can have false philosophies and come up with all kinds of things. Like you can see this in math, you can see this in physics. You can come up with a baseline philosophy and the math can work because it will always come back to the original lie. But it's the same thing with the virus, always protected. We have papers and we saw them in a picture, but that doesn't prove anything because that's just words. We need to see that you've actually done the proper processes that aren't altering the cells, because we understand this from the terrain perspective, that a disease cell will have different processes inside with all sorts of thousands and trillions of microbes that are involved in digesting damaged tissue, and will be compost to the cell in order to clean it up, remove it, heal it, whatever. So when you're poisoning a cell, you're creating the diseases, or you're creating what you're seeing. Now we can take it and say, let's put it in a lab. Let's pretend it's really scary and dangerous, and let's add all kinds of stuff and sequence all kinds of stuff. We don't really know exactly what they're doing in all those laboratories, but they're certainly not making a virus that's going to kill humanity because they would have already done it long ago. It's not the way the body works, and even the whole idea of the immune system, I don't agree with at all. That was a term coined by a doctor in a lecture who was discussing the lymphatic system, and it was taken and run off with, but that's not really how the body works. Like the whole idea of specific antibodies has never been proven. They're not specific. We don't have an immune system. We can't dissect the body, there it is. It's our entire body is trying to engage with self versus non-self, because it's important that we are who we are, and things that come from the outside have to be removed by the body. And even the white cells have been proven by Dr. Robert Young that they will go around and they will only do like cleanup of debris and things that shouldn't be in the area. And if it's something that needs to stay there, it will spit it back out again. So even the whole white blood cell theory doesn't hold water as far as what we're seeing in the living blood in dark field microscopy and other microscopy methods. So the main issue isn't about we have all these papers and they must be doing something in the lab and that sort of stuff. That's fine and dandy, but the problem is we have the methodologies are the issues. That all the papers do not satisfy that this is what the correlation is not proving the causation, because in the terrain understanding, the flags don't cause the garbage. The flags are attracted to the garbage. But we find them at the scene. We find firefighters at the scene, but fire doesn't mean that it's proving causation, that this correlation doesn't mean causation. And it's the same problem in the modern science. It's been inverted. It's saying that this is a disease causing agent because we find it at the scene. But that is proven to cause the disease because they haven't been able to do in infection studies purely by taking someone sick, you take the snot out and put it in someone. They did studies back in the Spanish flu. They tried to produce illness doing these methods. 30 experiments, in fact, were conducted in 1918 to 1919 by the United States Navy and U.S. Public Health Service, and they could not make one person sick with Spanish flu by doing those methods of injecting snot or putting others salivatory excretions into the other person's body. So it should be very easy to prove that these things are disease-causing agents by transferring the fluids, especially if there's such a scary virus and there's so many copies of it. There should be plenty enough in someone's host body to be able to make them sick or force them to be sick. In fact, in the studies where they try to force diseases, they always have to use toxic materials in order to attempt to try to make the sickness in the animal by usually tissue cultures, and Pasteur was famous for this. When you take the rabies virus, they're doing the same thing by injecting the brain with all sorts of toxic materials to create a seizure and frothing the mouth of the doggy to create that he had rabies. So when we really understand it from what we're doing from the inside of the living body and back now into the petri dish, we are not doing proper science to ensure that we are not manufacturing particles ourselves. We can characterize them all we want. Those scientific methods also have big errors in the assumptions and presumptions of what all of those different admixtures of proteins are, and we don't see the evidence. This is the main problem. You have all these crude and filtered secretions, but no one's getting influenza or no one's getting sick. And this pandemic was exactly that. It was based on the false PCR test, which is another huge problem when it comes to trying to isolate these nucleic acid sequences. They're using tests that are based on nucleic acid particles that are taken in a method that is not scientific, in the sense that when you're using a test, which is not really a test, it's a technique, and you take a piece of a nucleic acid particle from a non-purified sample, which means the sample has all sorts of bovine serum and other RNA particles, and then you're matching it back to, say, a Western blot, or where you have another piece of nucleic acid or a porcupine or whatever that's saying you've matched it. Now you think you have it, when really all you're doing is what Stefan Lange calls, you're circling back, or you're having a circular argument where you're saying you found it because it matches. And that's just not scientific. That's saying we need all of these copies of this nucleic acid substance, and now we're matching back to what we assume is the virus already, and we say we have it, and that's that. But there are tons of errors in science that haven't been properly elucidated or performed to prove that that is not our own DNA or our own RNA material that we produce when we try to have stress or other issues, and it's not proving that all the other RNA or DNA particles that are in the sample are not thrown in and admixed and put into the PCR process. So, there's more that I can say, obviously, about things like polymorphism, because right there, we have particles that can change shape depending on different terrain. So that alone should cause a different window, because the idea is that one causes one disease, but we don't have that evidence. We have changeable microbes under different conditions. So that means if your terrain is in the acidosis, as Dr. Charles alluded to, that means there's a different admixture of your own microbes in activity trying to deal with the damaged tissue and get rid of the waste particles, rather than if you change your terrain, you would see a different type of admixture of those, but coming from the same sources and changing their shape and their activity based on the actual medium that they're in. So when you take that and put it in a medium, you do not know if you have altered it. And so if you take a cell and you do that, you don't know if you've altered the bacteria or whatever the particles are from one to the other. And what we're trying to get to, what we're trying to help people understand, is that we did those studies like Lanza did, we would find that no bacteria or any of those particles or germs have to be in the sample to produce viruses. They can be produced by cytotoxic pathogenic processes, starvation processes of the cell. And you can find any level of virus in the sample. You can find fake HIV, you can find fake COVID, you can find any of these so-called viruses by simply starting the cell and looking for it. You can see what you find, what you want to find in the PCR process. And that's the problem that we're trying to help, communicate. And if we want to anticipate, then we would do that proper science, because it's certainly every method in all of the SARS-1 and SARS-2 papers all do the same methodology. They all take the sample, they all add other RNA fragments into the sample. So that's not part control, and those part control is not present. That's what I'm pointing out.
Awesome. So that was 15 minutes to respond to this.
I think that I'll do the response, but I think going forward, just because there's a lot of details that need to parse through, and you just got to conversation for technical or not conversation, and go a little bit deeper into just like almost sense by sense. Because there's so much content that we're both saying, it's hard to kind of rebut that, right? So we'll try. So I'll try. So the main point that I'd like to bring up is that my understanding of the terrain theorists, and if I'm wrong, Dr. Walter, just say I'm wrong, I'm not correct. But my understanding, my neophyte understanding of terrain theorists are that diseases are not caused by, quote, germs, pathogens, that we would term bacterial, fungal, parasitic, or viral. Is that a correct statement, or am I wrong?
Yes.
That's a correct statement, all right. So how do we explain from the terrain theorist point of view, chlamydia or gonorrhea, and how the fallopian tubes end up getting basically glued together and causing ectopic pregnancies? The two biggest STDs out there that are causing these kinds of things is chlamydia and gonorrhea. These are pathogens. So from the terrain theorist point of view, how do you explain it?
Do you want me to
Yeah.
get that backward now? Okay. So any of the diseases that we claim are, that we're capturing from others or getting from others, like these sorts of things, which are considered bacteria, and that essentially when you have people rubbing body parts together or having an encounter together, we haven't discounted other methods of transference or triggering of the body. So say that person is, well, first of all, we know for sure that is a disease-causing agent by the same rigorous method. So this is
Well, people that don't have gonorrhea and let's say chlamydia have a tendency, in the epi curve not to have ectopic pregnancies or pelvic inflammatory disease. So let's do the inference that PID is caused by STDs.
Right. So we're assuming that there's an issue in the body and that the germ caused it, rather than that process is happening or involving in as a result. Okay. So the terrain understanding is that wherever you find the pain is a result of a process. And if you're having, so how I describe a lot of these STDs is generally you have skin rotting, so friction, during the sexual act, so there's that problem. And you can have transference of toxins to that material, so that person perhaps isn't very clean or whatnot, and they are going through their own detox process. So how we explain a lot of this is that the body is always trying to cleanse, it's always that cleansing process. And when you cleanse it, the body removing layers, removing toxic materials from the bone. So if someone's in an active expression of toxic materials outside of the body, they're going through a process, they're going through they're triggered into a process. So that can be triggered in other people, potentially, if they have a similar base or a similar need for detox. We see this in families a lot, when families are seen to calm down with the same expressions. There's other ways to explain that haven't been properly elucidated by science. For example, seasonal triggers. We see this happen every spring and every fall. People go through their detox processes, and if they were to detox ahead of time, we talked about preventive medicine. If they were to do that, then they would see that they wouldn't get those expressions at all, because that's a cleansing process. There's no triggers to that. So sorry, go ahead.
The term they use is cleanse. I mean, yes, I'm a big fan of Dr. Group. I'm in health and naturopathic means, to try to prevent disease. I'm in allopathic school of medicine. So, so cleansing, cleansing the colon regularly, repopulating with good pre and probiotic is important. Getting good, proper gut biome is very important. But modern medicine has also shown that we make intermediates and that we need certain metabolisms to take place that work in conjunction with our gut biome. All right. So it's important for cleansing. But there's another piece is our immune system. And our immune system says, oh, you know what? I have a toll-like receptor on a particular macrophage, and it happens to be activated when a certain type of pathogen comes in. I'm going from memory, I think it's TLR 7. I could be wrong, but I think it's 7. Where when we have a virus that activates the toll-like receptor, we have a whole cascade of things internally in these cells that cause a pro-inflammatory response. All right, it activates NF-kappa beta and produces a bunch of cytokines and produces exosomes, and also, for cellular communication and interstitial communication and all this. So, so when you're saying cleanse, it seems to me that is what we call the immune system. So we may be using different terminology, and people are just saying, oh, it can't be the immune system, it must be something else. Here's another example, all right? Staph aureus ending up causing endocarditis or some sort of valve dysfunction in the heart. All right. How would you explain that? It's not rubbing. It's not rubbing.
So no, because the tissue is already damaged. So as I said, a couple things. One, we.
Okay. All right.
Let me answer your question.
No, you already said it. Okay, there's some sort of pre-existing condition that allows for some pathogen to get in. That's what you're saying.
Not even get in, that we make ourselves. It doesn't have to get in from anywhere. We can manufacture it ourselves. It can be produced from.
I think that what you're describing is a pro-inflammatory response to these necrosis that may be non-pathogenic. The point here is that there are diseases, so the average person can understand what we're talking about, because we're talking a little lofty here. There are disease processes that are non-pathogenic. There are disease processes that are pathogenic. You're saying and focusing on disease processes that are non-pathogenic.
No, I'm saying there are no pathogenic processes.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're focusing on that. You're focusing on that.
No, I'm not focusing on it. I'm saying those things aren't it's not how it actually works in the living tissue. See, everything that you're saying is coming from papers and identification. Once you've removed the material.
Yeah, but when you treat these people that have these pathogens, independent if this is
suppressing the mechanism. It's called suppression. So when you treat, you're suppressing, you're saying to the mechanism that's actually trying to heal it, no, don't.
Okay, all right, okay.
Don't, wait, don't cause the inflammation, don't be there, go away. And every time that happens, the body's mechanism stops doing the process, and then they declare, oh, it's cured, or we've done it, or whatever. Well, it always happens invariably is that it will come back again if you're lucky, or it will go into deeper organ tissues, because the process is actually one of repair, not a pathogenic process, not a disease process, not a bacteria causing process or a virus causing process. It's a result of already a problem of the terrain that has caused the tissue to go into acidosis, that is starting to create the particles from its own blood, from your own body, and that is trying to do the work and the job of cleaning up the waste and helping the repair mechanisms come in and fix it. And if we produce things that we're calling pathogenic, then the question is, okay, what are we missing in the body? What do we need to add into the body nutritionally now to make the process go forward and complete and resolve, rather than killing the agent that is there, that is trying to do the work of healing it, and trying to fix it or remove the dying damaged tissue. Instead, and I've done this in the last 20 years, we will find out where you're missing key nutrients, and we will apply those things, and we will help the body finish the job and heal the tissue, and then the disease process is finished. It resolves.
So let me get this straight. So Steve Jobs would stay alive if he just ate something nutritious, and that his pancreatic cancer would have been resolved.
If Steve Jobs knew about how to help the tissues recover and how to cleanse the body and put back into homeostasis using proper methods, getting out of acidosis, then yes, he would have healed his cancer. And that helped tons and tons of people reverse serious end-stage cancers by applying that knowledge.
I think I think that there's a place for proper nutrition and the idea that the body needs to get back into homeostasis, and that modern pharmacology has a tendency to make things worse before they make things better, if they make it better. So I'll grant you that allopathic means to try to quote, cure disease or treat disease can cause problems. This is what we call counterintuitive. This is the black box warnings on certain drugs, or the side effects that that are mentioned on certain drugs. So intervening from an allopathic perspective can cause more disruption in the body. I grant you that. All right. Now, and it's important to try for cancer patients, it seems to work better, that if one is on, let's say, some sort of chemotherapy, to have it coupled with some sort of nutritional therapy or some sort of supplements to try to reduce the effects of the chemotherapy. All right, but I don't think that to say that diseases, what we would call diseases, could be 100% cured by naturopathic means. I think that there is a place for naturopathic means, especially in prevention. But once the disease process has started and takes hold, then you're going to need other stronger therapies that may, in a lot of cases, cause more homeostasis disruption, right? Let's kind of switch the topic here a little bit.
Can I answer?
Yeah, go ahead. I wasn't even a question, that was a more statement.
There were a few things I just wanted to rebut. One, that you can cure absolutely everything. You never need allopathic drug ever in your life. All they do is suppress symptoms. So the problem is when you come from a philosophy of belief, then you're working with the existing philosophy. And we're trying to show that the existing philosophy is false based on the evidence not being there of the germ causing the disease, or that the drug needs to be there to suppress the symptom. So the disease categorization is a problem, because what we're doing is we are getting so sophisticated in the sense that we categorize every symptom in the body and then we lump them together, and that's called the disease. But when you're looking at the holism, you don't need to even have a label at all of the disease. You just need to look at the patient, categorize, look at the symptoms, how they're presenting, find out which organ systems are the most involved, and upregulate those functions. So the liver is always going to be part of that because that's what's helping remove the waste from the body.
Yeah, but the thing is that you have pathogens. You have pathogens that mutate, and that certain drugs will not work because of those mutations, and that they become resistant, drug resistant.
That's an ideology that doesn't.
It's not an ideology. It's been proven. It's certain antibiotics don't neutralize in a petri dish certain other.
They poison your body. And they stop the process, like I said, there are suppressive methods.
But when they do the genetic sequencing,
Dr. Paul, just.
But the thing is that when they do.
This is gonna work best, hang on, this is gonna work best if you just let her finish and then rebut, because when we're hearing two people that it starts to get wrong, just let her finish before you want to rebut.
I'm just trying to rebut everything that you're saying in the statement, so the point of view of the belief system. So the belief system is, these are life-saving things, we need them, we had to have them. And if you break down every single one of these existence in history, you'll see that never was the case, that never was true. Polio was not the case of a virus. Polio was poisoning by pesticide residues, Paris green and DDT, for example. So if you go back through all history, you'll see every time that there's been a massive issue, it's always been from a toxic poisoning of some sort, through a biochemical exposure, through chemical process in the body, through the homeostasis being thrown off by toxicity or starvation, or the nutrition is not there to do the job that the body's designed to do. In the terrain understanding, the body is smart and intelligent and knows what it's doing. In the conventional system, the body is stupid, there's all these different parts, there's all these specialists, and these are the life-saving things that you need, because when the magic pill comes in and the symptoms disappear, then you're said to be cured and you can off you go and you go home. Meanwhile, the person is actually in a worse state after that. They're either going to get it again or it's going to become worse for them and on the way to cancer or other chronic disease states where the body can no longer detox properly anymore because the entire microbiome, if you want to call it that, is now damaged. So we're actually 65% of us is not even human, it's microbes. And so when you go and you kill that, then we're actually killing ourselves by doing those processes. So, and I wanted to answer your gonorrhea question because I didn't feel like I did that properly. So the problem with the methods and the understanding of the conventional system is they think they know everything, so they don't investigate these things anymore. They don't look at things like toxic condoms. Did those people use toxic condoms when they were having sex? They don't look at the toxic medicines they were on when they were having sex. They don't look at what's in the semen and those interactions with the materials and the solutions, what kind of toxins were in the semen, what kind of other toxic products are the women using tampons with, all kinds of pesticides in them, or do they have an overridden reproductive system already, and instead of saying, oh, it's bacteria causing or it's this, so if we don't do our due diligence to understand that there's other ideas that need to be studied to put it together properly of what the real cause and effect situation is, then what we're just going to keep doing is go in these circles where the drugs come in, the person feels better, off they go, they come back again, doctor, I'm sick again, they give another drug, off they go, while their life is being shortened by this, with not doing the proper proofs of showing in the living body what's actually going on, because we're not studying the live blood, we're not studying it we're doing it all outside, we're doing everything in situ, we're not doing everything in vitro, not in vivo. So when you put this into practice, as I have for the last 20 years, it concretizes the knowledge that our theories or our baseline philosophies are what are in error, because we're assuming that the body doesn't know what it's doing when it does, and we're taking out vital organs, or cutting into or giving radiation when it's actually the mechanism producing a tumor is a metabolic problem where the body can't get rid of the waste properly. So it's packaging it away. And you never cut a tumor, you never want to remove it, and you never want to add radiation. The body will remove the tumors naturally when you fix the metabolic disarray. And I've done this many, many times. And I'm constantly helping people correct their hormone balance.
Well, cancer is not just metabolic, it's chromosomal. What are you talking about? It is. Because when you look at, I've done cancer research, so I know what I'm talking about. So, so when you look at a tumor, all right, when you sequence the genome of the cells that you're pulling out of that tumor, you're going to get a plethora of different genomes, right? The reason being is that as the cell is dividing, you're getting transpositions that are taking place, and things are getting knocked out. And this is the reason why aggressive tumors happen. So there is a metabolic function that's being disrupted, but it is chromosomal, meaning that as the cell is dividing, literally you're getting sometimes larger genomes and sometimes you're getting smaller genomes, depending on what kind of cancer and what stage you're in. All right, so it is chromosomal. And once you reach that point of no return with the chromosome, you gotta get it out because it's not gonna fix itself. I mean, like for example, you'll have tumors that have more than 46 chromosomes in it. All right, you'll have tumors that will have less than 46 chromosomes because they've been glued together. All right, so how's that gonna just self-correct? You gotta get that out.
Never said it was gonna self-correct.
Yeah, you did. You said don't take the tumor out. The body will get rid of it.
The body will get rid of it when you make the proper corrections. You can have DNA breakages and damages to chromosomes, but that's secondary. That's after the fact.
We're not talking microscopic damage. We're talking macro level.
It's irrelevant. And again, this is the problem with the current paradigm. It's looking at the effects and saying it's the cause. It's the same thing. It's the same problem. It's an ignorance to the body's mechanisms and the misunderstanding of the holism, that it's not just over here or over there, you have a lump here, take it out. It's the whole body that's in disarray, and it's producing the tumor as a life-saving measure, not as a problem. The problem is of course, you have this tumor, but that's not because the tumor decided to just grow there. It's a metabolic process. It's in the blood. It's in the acidity. It's in the way the lifestyle is. You correct the lifestyle, not saying you just leave it. You have to correct the lifestyle and make changes to what the body is doing. Half the time, the body would never even produce such a thing because the child was damaged right at birth from vaccines and poisons. And they don't even make those correlations ever. They'll never say that, a vaccine given as a child is going to lead to a disease later in life. They won't even do those studies. They won't even look at that material. So it's all born of hokey pokey, fancy names, look, we know, because we have the studies, all that kind. It's just arrogance. It has nothing to do with the scientific process. It's all taken out of the body and stained and manipulated. It's killing people and saying it's saving people because it's suppressing a mechanism. And later they always get the tumors back, or they only have a lifespan of a couple years after the process, or their quality of life is reduced considerably if they do manage to survive it because they are eating better or they did make some changes in their lifestyle. And this is the problem with the modern medicine belief system. It's formulated on lies and it's formulated on false science and it's not done properly, and no one wants to seem to accept that you can be all fancy schmancy with receptors and all this crap when most of it, even here.
You cut out your volume, cut out there, Dr. Nana.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay.
Maybe you want to just say a response now while she's fixing her.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not fair for her not to hear me.
Okay.
But, the point that I wanted to make, I don't know if she can hear me, but, the point I wanted to make is it's not being fancy schmancy. It's just that
Can you hear Dr.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
My battery's dying.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, I can hear you.
Okay, so, it's not a matter of trying to be fancy schmancy, at all. I mean, but it is very difficult to go through an MD program. It's extremely challenging. And there's a body of knowledge. And I'll be the first one to admit, and I'm not the only one to admit this, that we know less than what we know. But I think the terrain theorists know even less. All right? To say that the answer is, well, keep the tumor in and hopefully you get to homeostasis and your body will heal itself. In some cases, maybe that would work. But I think in certain cases, like if, let's say, a fourth stage sarcoma, you know what? Most likely, we got a big problem, all right? If it's maybe stage 1 in some types of cancers, in some regions of the body, maybe what Dr. Bowman makes a lot of sense. I am still a firm believer in what Dr. Bowman was saying in terms of preventative medicine. Makes total sense. Total sense. All right. Where the problem comes in is that once a disease happens, what do? And it depends on the severity of the disease. And when we go back to, let's say, germ theory for a second, and we look at, let's say, bacteria that becomes drug resistant, or HIV-1 become drug resistant, which is starting to happen. And now we're losing our pharmaceutical ability to keep those pathogens at bay. So there's flare-ups that take place with these patients. How do we know that the terrain theorists would go, how do you know that these pathogens are drug resistant? Okay, well, we take a look at certain types of drugs and see if it's neutralizing that pathogen. And then we look at the gene sequence of it, and we can pinpoint where the mutations within its genes and those particular regions that are coding for proteins, what the actual three-dimensional structure of that protein, how it changed, and the charge level, and how it's changed, and how it can prevent the actual drug from neutralizing it. Like for example, beta lactams. There's mutations that take place in the outer cellular area of the bacteria, and certain types of antibiotics can't neutralize that pathogen. Right? There's a mutation that takes place. Right? So we know at the level of the actual amino acid level and the charge of the protein of the protein and why it is resistant. To say that, there's these quote experts, these MDs or DOs or whatever, PhDs, whatever, that think they know it all and put it in this bucket called germ theory, but they don't know anything, that all their knowledge is just hocus pocus. But yet we have a level of detail that the trained theorists don't have. They say, well, you have to go into homeostasis and we got to balance your body. But I haven't really heard a whole lot about, like, at the molecular level, exactly what the mechanism is. You said, Dr. Bowman, just, this is the question. You said that we're cleansing, but you don't seem to subscribe to the idea of modern immunology or just the idea of how the body works with the immune system. Yet, if we kill off the immune system, and there's ways for us to do that, diseases happen. There are opportunistic, what we call opportunistic infections that take place. So take it any way you want with that, Dr. Bowman. It just seems to me that the specificity of the terrain theorists saying you just didn't do the proper procedures and everything is garbage can't be right. SARS-CoV-2 alone, we know that the actual changes in the variants and why the docking is different in the ACE, for the ACE2 receptor, or why certain antibodies are not working as well. So
I just wanted to ask Dr. Paul a question. Do you know the virus isolation process? And if you do, can you please explain that to us?
The original isolate for SARS-CoV-2 you're talking about?
Just any virus.
Well, the very first.
What do they do to isolate a virus?
Okay, the very first one, I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I think the very first virus that was isolated was the tobacco virus. And, so what it was is it was, the tobacco plant was having a disease and they wanted to figure out what it was because it was such a large industry. So there was I don't know his name, but there was a scientist that looked into this, and my understanding is that he boiled the leaves, and then that liquid went through a filtration process, and that filtration, that thin mesh, captured certain particles, right? And for the tobacco plant, it's a very large virus. There's different sizes of viruses. This one's a very large one, so it's somewhat easy to filter. So that was the very first one. That was the very first one.
Let's say the modern day virus, if you're taking a virus, whether it's SARS-CoV-2, do you know what the process is in order for them to isolate that virus? What they do, to it in order to.
It's going through a very thin series of meshes and chromatography to isolate. Then what happens is then you have this substance, and you don't know if it's pure or not, but you have this substance, and what you do is actually do a sequencing. And if it's something new, then it'll pop up on glass. It'll say, oh, there's no homology. Or if there is a substantial amount of homology, then there is some sort of link to that homology, some sort of evolutionary link. And this is what happened with the paper that was published with the first known isolate of SARS-CoV-2 from December 26, 2019, was that they actually sequenced this, built the contig file, and to do this, you have to use NextGen. NextGen is a sequencing method, but they matched it to bad SARS and SARS. And that matches the paper that was published in 2008 by Dr. Sheet. So the isolate that came from December 26th matches the chimera in vitro early stage what Dr. Sheet did. And it's obviously further developed, but the thing is that to your point, it goes through a filter and a chromatography process, and it has to be sequenced to know if you have something or not. And those early sequences could have artifacts in it, to Dr. Vollmer's point. But over a period of filtrations, you can get it more pure, by diluting it and then running the PCR and diluting it and running the PCR and running. See, Dr. Vollmer is saying that this is an important point. Hold on, let me make one more statement and that's it. Dr. Vollmer is saying that PCR is garbage. PCR is not garbage. All right, PCR is not garbage. What it is that you can't just say, we're gonna decide if you have a disease or not solely on PCR. I think that's bad. It's not proper science. It's not proper medicine. You have to have clinical presentation. Just because you're positive PCR doesn't necessarily mean you have COVID-19 disease. But if you have glass opacity through your CT scan, and you have upper respiratory infection, and you have fever of 104, and you're starting to have some other septic kind of reaction, most likely you do have SARS-CoV-2, right? So the point here is that it's a tool to help with diagnosing a problem. But to say that PCR is just garbage and all PCR should be thrown out the window, it's like that's just wrong. That's not true. But
besides the PCR, I just wanted to know about the actual virus isolation process, and if it was actually corrupted, would everything else down the chain of line then be faulty science if it was a corrupted process? So I want to ask Dr. Amanda, do you know how they do to isolate a virus?
Yes, and also the tobacco mosaic virus is not even a virus, it's actually part of the bacterial form. So bacteria, when they're in shock, when they go through fast shock or slow shock, So when they go through a certain level of shock, they'll either produce bacterial phage, which is its own protection, its own DNA protection, so it can come back later, or it will produce a spore if it's under very intense conditions. So it will change its shape. Yet again, it's pleomorphic. It will change its shape under specific conditions, and the mistaken medical mafia basically takes that and says they found something new. And the problem, and how I see doctors and scientists is they live in their own little world. And they have all these tinker toys in front of them, and they're putting pieces together, but they have really fancy toys, and they think it's really important, and they think they found connections. And they keep running studies over their connections over and over again. But all they're playing with are artifacts that they've manufactured in their own cellular laboratories, which has no relationship to the body whatsoever, and no disease development process as well. And so they think they know, and this is always a problem when you think you already know, you don't actually investigate. You don't look to see back, do we really even have organelles? Is the DNA structure really how we think it is? And these are the questions that we need to really discuss at a proper level, which really isn't happening here in this debate. Now, to get back to the virus isolation, they do not filtrate, which is part of the failures of all the SARS-1 and CoV-2. So both SARS processes, as I said, they did not do filtration methods in most of these papers. What they do is some of them take a sample from a person who has respiratory symptoms, and it's usually only 1 or 2 people. So the sample size doesn't even satisfy the scientific method, which should have a huge sample size. Then they take it out of the body, they put it in a cell culture, and the cell culture has human and animal cells, as well as all kinds of additives that I've mentioned before. Then what happens is the cells die. This is called the proof of a virus. The cells die, but there's no controlled test to see if the mixture minus the person's sample would cause the cell death. Because if they did that, they would also see cell death, and they would say, oh look, there's now a virus in this sample too. What are we doing wrong if they did the proper controls, as Dr. Stefanica has done? Then they take a fraction of that and they put it with a pipette, and inside this little pipette, you will have a centrifugation process that's, separating lighter from heavier stuff. You'll have RNA containing samples from one person. You'll have RNA containing other kinds of animal cells. You'll have RNA from cellular debris, RNA from fecal bovine, RNA containing natural synthetic genetic material containing RNA. Virus lookalikes that are RNA containing, like organelles, like mitochondria. Virus lookalikes RNA containing exosomes, if you will. Virus lookalikes containing extracellular vesicles, micelles, microvilli, etc., chemicals and antibiotics. There's no controlled test to see if the isolate is transmissible or causes disease. Then it is put into another medium. Then that sample is taken, put into a computer-generated RNA primer nucleobase, usually 18 to 24 nucleobases. If the primer matches some of the RNA of the virus isolate, then they found a match. The primer is used to digitally construct the rest of the virus genome. So if you don't have the virus to compare to, actually what they did with SARS-CoV-2 is they guessed it was close enough. So it was close enough to SARS-CoV-1 that they said, oh, we have a new one. And
no, that's not what they said. They said it was that's not what they said.
They made the leap of faith that because it's similar enough, I can show it's the same thing. Well, we're similar enough to chimpanzees, but I'm not a chimpanzee, so this is another 5,000 times. And then you say you have the COVID-19 genome with 30,000 nucleobases with together. And so
And how many times do they read it? How many times do they read it? Because they're
and then they read it through the different PCR techniques or methods
to converge to accuracy. So I agree with you at the very beginning, when you do your first reads, you're gonna have a lot of errors.
things inside the material. Longer, because they're definitely not.
In the living body or in an animal model. And then you do further clinical studies to understand if there's some sort of side effect and the efficacy of it. That's how it is, right? Is there room for error when you do an in vitro study to make an inference on what it's doing in the human body? Of course. No one's saying that it's not. And this is the reason why in papers they say this was an in vitro study or an in vivo study. All right? And there's a lot of inference that takes place. But we don't have really good tools, and we are constrained by ethics to be able to to see exactly what is happening. We don't have a plexiglass, or an animal system, and, see how diseases are really progressing, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, as a, unless you're like.
I'm still stuck on this virus isolation process. Are they taking the sample out of the body and injecting it with some animal things in order to like bovine serum, monkey stuff? This is the virus isolation process. Are they injecting with animal stuff? I'm asking, is that what you're doing? I'm stuck on that. How can we get
There's the isolation, right, you're confusing two things here. There's isolation and there is the growth. You can grow viruses in culture. And Dr. Vollmer said aptly that you add things to the culture, you have different degrees in it, and these viruses are manufactured. And then, so that's the growing side. The isolation side, for SARS-CoV-2, the very first one was taken out of the lung. They put tube in the lung, took the fluid out of the lung, and filtered that. And from there, they ran the sequence. So there wasn't a growth medium add-on or anything like that. Now, it is true that if they need to multiply this, they'll use these means, kill off those cells, filter out the debris to the best. Do you have a 100% pure isolate? Oh, no. But is it good enough to be able to do experiments to see modes of action in different cells, or put them in animal models that those animal models have been modified in such a way that acts like the human immune system to see how it reacts? Yeah. But to say it's never been isolated, it's just wrong. And on top of it, the autopsy data is coming from the tissue around the heart, the adipose tissue around the heart. That's the reservoir. I mean, think about what I'm saying here. This is explaining the myocarditis. So autopsy data is showing it too.
Irrelevant.
I mean, it's irrelevant. The SARS-CoV-2 is in the adipose tissue. How's that irrelevant?
Jesse, we're just getting in a circular argument because Paul's already said these things and I've already refuted them because he did no sample, no human or no tissue sample at all, just the Petri dish methods that I said. So adding in the bovine serum, the monkey kidney test.
So he's saying that the monkey kidney, the monkey serum and all that is the source of the pathogen.
Correct. The methods by which they're saying they're growing it or isolating it or grabbing it, whatever terminology you want to use, the methods themselves are producing the particles they're saying are the viruses. And then when they take those, they aren't satisfying the postulates that should be satisfied if you're trying to prove pathogenicity. Nice one.
There is a well-known that, and I'm sure you know this, it's well known that LDL oxidized leads to cardiovascular disease, creating plaques, right? Well, if you reduce the oxidative stress that's going on in your blood through taking antioxidants, you reduce the oxidized LDL and reduce plaque, right? Well, if you have a patient that comes in that has very, very high blood pressure, at let's say 160/90, all right, you put them on an ACE blocker, right, an ACE inhibitor, and with proper diet and exercise, slowly titrate them off of that, and move more towards the realm that you're a specialist in. So this is where, unfortunately, I agree with you that allopathic training isn't syncing up with naturopathic methods, either in the front end or the back end of the disease progression. The problem that I'm seeing with naturopaths is that, to be frank, and I'm being, to be kind, all right, I think there's a lot to be learned from naturopathic individuals, and but you didn't go through the training like we do in medical school. Nor did I go through the training, nor did I go through the training to be a naturopath, so it's different.
You know what, the indoctrination is so deep, you can't get your head out of it. And not only that, I've extricated myself from the natural community because it's going into the allopathic model where it believes in the fake immune system, fake viruses, germ theory hoax, all of that. You it keeps pushing drugs and surgeries and this kind of garbage, it's ruined now. It doesn't even help people the way it did because they've lost their foundations of a foundational understanding of how the body works from a training perspective. So they've lost their way. I refuse to be part of it, honestly, because we need the true nature doctors back that understand that all of this mess that we've created is completely unnecessary. Whether you have this kind of part of a cholesterol, that kind of part of it, it's absolutely unnecessary, and that's not what even causes heart disease. Actually, the studies show that the people with the highest cholesterol live the longest. And so that's all bullcrap, because what happens is the body is inflamed inside the vessels, and it creates nits and tears. The cholesterol comes and actually puts down kind of like wall patch to prevent a blowout, to prevent the problem. And when that gets carried away, sure, it can block up and cause a problem, but the whole point is you understand that when that starts to rise, you have an inflammatory process. You have it. So you fix it immediately. You don't need the drug. You don't even need to know what it is, or the details of what it is. It's irrelevant, and it gets us lost. We get lost in the minutia of this, oh, we know that it's from this study, and it said this and that, and this sort of thing. But it's just, we're blowing hot air out of our
No.
That's
Dr. Palmer, you're wrong.
unnecessary.
You're wrong. No, you're partially right, and you're partially wrong. The thing is that by understanding the disease process, especially for cardiovascular disease, is important, and the things that and the research that is going on in cardiology on how to really unblock, blockage, cardiovascular blockage. It was through studies of metformin, the studies of using K2, MK7, and D3, and omega-3. And these studies showed that over a period of time, in controlling your blood glucose levels, that you can diminish the blockage. Right? This is huge, because this is
what find the opposite. So you can do a study that shows coffee's good for you. You can do a study that coffee's bad for you.
You're missing the
study
point.
that this is good for you, but if too much is bad for you. This is what my point is, and then I'll make my closing statement. Is that this is the headspace that we get trapped in when we think in an allopathic way, from the outside in rather than inside out. We forget about our ancient knowledge from traditional Chinese medicine. We forget about the energy part of the body. We forget about the electrical part of the body. We forget about the interactions and meridians and all the organ systems. We forget about the mental emotional sphere and how that impacts our health through leaking biochemicals inside the body through stress and the way that we think them out. All of these things are lost because we're getting down to, look, we have this thing, and do this thing, and this piece of parts, and this piece of parts, and we miss the bigger picture. And instead, people are getting questioned, we're actually losing our way because of this. And the fundamental argument is that we don't have these particles, but we think we don't. And this is why I encourage everyone to just always throw away, every day, always throw away everything. And I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to see, what else is going on. Because the second we think we think we have a study or whatever, we've all been lost beyond, because we're coming from it that this is how we're tinkering with the body. We don't need to tinker with the body at all. What we need to do is stop meddling with the body at birth, stop poisoning the body with vaccines and drugs. And most of these diseases wouldn't even exist in the first place, because the meddling from the infectious system have caused diseases we never experienced in our lives. And this is why we need to get to understanding. This is why we need to elucidate what's really going on as far as holism. And get to the real stuff, the real cool stuff, like burning water, water will stimulate, water has vibration, water attracts with other waters, the energy field attracts with other people. I can see what's going on pheromones in humans, pheromones that put off others and trigger another person, like interacting with another person. It's all that little virus in the live. So we're going to miss all this boring actual research science that I would love to do. Like lots of doctors actually did it and do. But here we are, arguing over how we're talking about it. It's absolutely irrelevant. It has no bearing on our health well-being, has no bearing on changing the way we are, and the degradation of how we got to this place now. We have half our kids are autistic. We're going to say most people get cancer in their lifetimes now. It's an atrocious mess. The proof is in the pudding that this type of approach doesn't work, and it gets us back into time minutia, separating out the parts. Drugs and the way that they're doing, we're actually bringing patients, and they just don't live with us anymore. They need to cover that.
But I think there is adequate evidence to infer that SARS-CoV-2 exists. Not only that, there's a paper trail, there's a money trail, there is published paper trail. In 2008, Dr. Shi published a paper showing the chimera of the plasmid, mixing it with pseudo-HIV virus with 293 cell line. That led to the jump from bat ACE2 receptor to human ACE2 receptor. That put the antennas up in the agency community, the biosecurity community. That led to further development with Barrick's lab. Barrick made SARS-CoV-1 in his laboratory in between April of 2001 to about mid-2002. The first case of SARS-CoV-2 was in November 2002. We have the terrain there saying that viruses don't exist, receptors, particular receptors don't exist and whatnot. But I'm just looking at the Barrett's papers, Dr. Shee's papers, Dr. Sims' papers, and in his laboratory, they were playing around with coronaviruses. And in his early career, he was messing around with coronaviruses and myocarditis in rabbits and in mice. I see a pattern. And when there's a pattern, you have to start asking questions. And I am taking the stance that the trainers are not sounding the alarm on how dangerous things are starting to evolve in some of these biolabs, where they're playing around with pathogens. It's not just viruses, but they're playing around with pathogens that could cause huge problems in the world. And when you're making these weapon systems for spectral dominance, who's watching the watcher? You know, Derek seems to have some sort of, you know what, he can do whatever he wants. Fauci, there's no ramifications. Congress paid for it. They gave the green light. The senators and the representatives in Congress. So it's not just this debate about germ theory versus terrain theory. It's about an existential threat to humanity based on the things that mankind is doing in the laboratories. The trainers are saying that these things don't exist, so don't worry about the
not
virus.
humanity. It's
But yet
mankind.
Newland,
Because they're kind of a man.
recently, the deputy secretary, I think it's the State Department, was being interviewed on Congress, and she admitted to the biolabs that were in Ukraine. There's a problem here. I see a pattern. I see that we're moving to terminal destruction, as Noam Chomsky has stated recently. And that if we just say it's, you know, don't worry about viruses, they don't exist. Don't worry about these biolabs, because it's all energy inside, and if you just have the proper balance and the proper yoga technique, you'll be fine. But yet you have children that come out in utero with diseases. You know, so maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, Jesse. But it is better to decide on a conservative approach.
Maybe it's those who
in
don't got
terms of trying to
melanin.
shut down bioweapons that leads
Maybe it's
to
those
death
who
and
came out
destruction and loss of
of the chaos.
constitutional freedoms. So this is not really so much a debate about germ theory versus terrain theory. It's about an existential threat to humanity because of spectral dominance of certain defense departments. That right there is the crux of everyone that's talking about SARS-CoV-2. So when people say that SARS-CoV-2 doesn't exist, then Barrick isn't dangerous. And believe me, trust me on this, Barrick is very, very dangerous.
Well, thank you so much, both. This was amazing. This was enlightening. I really appreciate you both taking the time. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from this, and with what Dr. Paul is saying is true. There's people, psychopaths out there creating things. They can create weapons that can spray in the air that can kill everybody. There is, I'm sure Dr. Nanda would admit that people have the ability to poison people. They
Oh, they're already,
they can be
I
injected.
think the brainstorm.
Yeah, they're spraying stuff in the air. They're doing stuff to the chemicals. They're spraying their poison. So there is a threat. You are 100% right, Dr. Paul, and that's what we need to focus on: stopping these, psychopaths from creating these things. And we can get it in a future time.
Thank you, Hank, for assisting the debate, and thank you.
So we should just tell them, hey, go back to the caves. Yeah, right. We tried that already.
Appreciate you sticking your neck out for that, and I wish you well in your med studies.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everybody for all your likes, comments, hearts, and shares. This was music. This is our 200th episode of the Missing Link. We're trying to bring you all of the information the best we can. Next week we have Tony Pantalleresco. He's a person who does a lot on nutrition and helps people with their diet and stuff like that. That's next Wednesday. And we also have Bobby Van Hoss. He's a lawyer who is running against the governor of New York, who has bypassed Congress, and he's made it available for people to have mandatory isolation and basically concentration camps. So we have that next Wednesday, and then we've got the next Thursday. We've got Thursday night. We can talk about urine therapy. He's been doing that for a long time. Danny Buckeridge, he talks a lot about this going on in the world, and we just don't talk about stuff after your life. So appreciate you all. This is The Missing Link. You can find us on Rumble, YouTube, Telegram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and we're probably gonna have to take this one off of YouTube. So just because of the subject, we're only have 2 YouTube channels needed. So we have to just kind of it's gonna go on the other 5 places. And it's low, Dr. Paul.
Yeah, I'm trying to talk about that with Dr. Holder, but Dr. Holder seems to suggest that HIV doesn't exist. But if HIV didn't exist, I'm gonna be able to take the faculty on HIV, use it as therapy. Because she thinks it doesn't exist. See?
Well, whether
I mean, so something doesn't make sense. I took something out of something that doesn't exist.
well, what she explained, and when you're taking a sample, and then now you're adding all these monkey and bovine serum and all these things that you can basically that's a pseudoscience. Now all of a sudden you can make anything up what you want if you're doing it. If this person, the doctor that she's talking about, was able to create these things with nothing, no tissue, just repeating the exact process that they're using of inserting, you can make anything, and you can make people believe anything. But besides that, whether people believe in viruses or not, these guys got to be shut down. These psychopaths that are creating these viruses or these, whatever this money's going through, look at NASA, they're getting $5 million.
Well, those psychopaths are just the tip of the iceberg. Who is supporting it?
Whatever, they're filtering your money out. We don't know where or why they're getting money. If they're
Who's supporting this system?
They're trying to,
This
kill the Russians.
pigmentocracy. The pigmentocracy, the colorism.
Creating biological warfare weapons.
The white skin is on top.
And whether you believe in viruses or not.
Always happening right now. The white world, War 3. It's because they're holding on, trying to desperate hold on to this white hegemonic power.
No.
Okay, so
They own everything. They control everything, all the media, all the science, everything. And if it's not their curriculum, you disappear. Mysteriously disappear.
So both of them were put in a nursing home for different reasons.
When are we going to speak up the truth?
According to the weapon system.
Yes, these psychopaths don't want to destroy everything we can. If we feel defeated, if we feel we can't,
Bullshit.
well then that's probably we ain't gonna be able to stop them. So let's
These psychopaths, those
figure
psychopaths,
out
yeah.
this stuff and we can win this fight. So love y'all,
Mhm.
and we will see you guys again soon. Bye everyone, see you next week.
All right, bye-bye.
Disseminating propaganda every day. Lies, false flags every day. Lies, false flags everywhere.
Okay, so that was the
False flag after false flag after false flag.
that was the debate.
Even in
And what I'm gonna
Brooklyn,
do-
in the
We're
subway.
gonna do something special.
Fake blood,
And
fake bullets,
and what I'm gonna do is
everything.
I'm gonna post.
Using African Americans,
the actual
Secretary of Defense,
and people that are
to
watching
put up a
can call
pathetic
them,
show with Blinken.
give their perspective on what they heard, and let's do a conversation off of the debate. Kind of a post-debate chat. Okay, so let me. Hinders, right? You have these two hinders, and you have these receptor inhibitors. So I just like, there's medication out there that's blocking receptors and blocking enzymes, but yet, they're saying that these certain things don't exist. It's like, well, why would the mechanism be working? This is part of the reason why you have to go into the details. She was saying, oh, we don't need to know all the details of this. You need to know the details to understand the mode of action. Because by understanding the mode of action, you can help with the healing process or stop the disease process. So going into detail, I think is important.
Yeah, reducing population in the U.S. by 200,000 peoples, that they gotta disappear by 2030, according to your bullshit.
The conversation I had with Dr. Lowman. I mean, Andrew's always putting stuff in text, and he doesn't go on Zoom.
If you confront them, then, oh, you're the racist. How can I be racist? I don't own shit. I don't own anything. You guys do. Guys can decide who get low interest loans
I did a video and I posted
or no interest. They don't even pay the damn loans.
Yes, Andrew should be going on Zoom. He always talks, but he doesn't want to go on Zoom. All you gotta click is the link, Andrew, and come on. All right, so
Yeah, it's like 3 hours
HIV
already.
Transmission really
4 hours
accelerated
already.
in the 50s. It so happens to coincide with the polio vaccine trials in the Congo at around the same time, from 1956 to 1959. And through growing the kidney cultures to make the polio vaccine led to transmitting SIV to humans, and therefore the zoonosis starts. And I'm taking the perspective that, but HIV, being through the zoonotic event with SIV. Well,
As a simian.
if that's true, then HIV has been around for a while. Now, the Hooper theory, which was written in a book called The River.
Listen, the Puerto Ricans have told me they had uncles, they have fathers, they have brothers, they got Kaposi's, they got all the damn symptoms. I'm talking about in the 60s and the 70s here in New York City. So they were just hoping that it will take off. Just like with this one. They thought it was going to be like a really bad one. But thank God so far, I mean, like White Bayer was studying, heart disease. It's like too many smoking guns.
Talks about oral polio vaccine being made from a certain type of chimpanzee, and the actual kidney tissue have SIV in it. SIV is the simian
like
monkey
who
version of
the ones that they don't got ass, the ones that they don't got lips, the ones that are calling other people monkeys. Those are the monkeys. The classic cracker technique, like Victoria Nolan will say, right? Right?
And I'm taking the perspective that I think both have it. That because of the lymph node tissue in 1930s had HIV in it, that HIV was present in the human population of Africa before the polio vaccine program. But there are different subgroups.
break.
And so that means that there were different, quote, if the zoonosis theory is true, then it means that there were different
Everything is in
zoonotic
Africa. Everything bad is
episodes
Africa.
that led to
Right.
These transmissions
Classic
from
cracker
monkey to
technique.
humans. Through eating the monkey meat or butchering the monkey meat. But I think because HIV transmissions really accelerated in the 50s, it so happens to coincide with the polio vaccine trials in the Congo at around the same time, from 1956 to 1959. So it seems you can get the Zoom link in the description underneath the video. So you just click the arrow to open up the description underneath the video, and then you just click the link for the Zoom. And you should see it. I already have someone in Zoom, so the link works. So just click the link in Zoom. Maybe I can also just post the link in the chat. Maybe that works too. My channel. So I'm answering a question from Curious. So let me answer the question, and I'll have you guys come on in and then ask questions or just pontificate about whatever you want to pontificate about. But there's no format. So Curious, to answer your question, you were saying that if someone has HIV already, would they get SARS-CoV-2? Was that the question?
If they're on HIV net.
Wait, say that again?
People who are HIV net.
Oh, HIV meds.
Yeah, you're taking retrovirals.
No, are they on the meds because they have HIV?
Ain't that the same thing?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, because back in the early days of Wuhan, when I had Miss Taiwan on my show, who was getting inside information from Wuhan, because she can translate what the news was going on in China to English on my channel. She was a girl and a translator. So that's how I had inside information from Wuhan during the early days. During those early days, they were treating people with antiretroviral medication from HIV for SARS-CoV-2 patients. All right, and the thought was that it was the proteoviral load of SARS-CoV-2. So, but those weren't working very well. So to answer your question, they tried it at the very beginning of the first wave that was happening. So it was at the end of 2019, at the very beginning of 2020. And ART medication did not work. And this partially is because those protease inhibitors don't work as well for the 3CL docking on SARS-CoV-2. So SARS-CoV-2 has a unique, all beta coronavirus has this unique feature called the 3CL protease. Well, if you have a protease inhibitor that can block the 3CL, then you slow down the viral infection, all right? And this is part of the reason why they came out with the Pfizer drug and the Merck drug. That's more targeted to the SARS-CoV-2 genome. But to your point, they did try it and it didn't work. Hopefully that answers your question, Curtis.
Didn't work. But they're prescribing right now retrovirals.
When you get the jab or vaccine, it depends on which jab or vaccine you're talking about. But if you take ART and you have the vaccine, I don't think that there's any literature out there that says that it reduces vaccine injury. I don't think there's anyone who's been taking ART and the vaccine that's non-HIV infected. Now, there is research out there that people that have HIV and that are on ART treatment because they're trying to suppress the viral load of HIV-1, that those individuals have been given the vaccine, and that group, the HIV group that had the vaccine, I don't think there's any increase or decrease of vaccine injury compared to non-HIV patients. It doesn't mean that vaccine injury doesn't happen with HIV patients. It does, but it doesn't happen any more or any less than a non-HIV vaccinated individual.
Listen, I heard in Housing Works, in GMAC, in all these programs that I used to go, they told me that nobody died. They died from fucking bullshit diabetes and stuff, hypertension, but not from that. They're taking retrovirals. I'm taking retrovirals. I ain't getting no jabbings, nothing.
And that I don't think that ART helps or hurts the situation. But there are papers out there that talk about HIV patients should they be getting the vaccine or should they not be getting the vaccine because they are immune suppressed. They're immune suppressed because of the virus, but also the medication that they're taking is similar to an immune suppressant, right? So, there's this debate. If you have an immune suppressed individual, do you give them vaccines at all? Because you're trying to elicit an immune response, right? So, but the research out there suggests that there's no increased or decreased incidences in HIV positive patients that are controlling their viral load with ART.
They didn't care. They were still pushing those jabbings.
Thank you. So,
Like there's no
my
tomorrow.
two favorite people are in the chat here. So Jesse and Daryl, tell me what you think. I mean, which
I
one?
think there's room for both. I'm gonna say it straight up. There is room for both ideological views. Theoretically, that is the only way you can do it. You need to know what's this way of saying? You can be a scientist and miss the lifestyle there is. Or if you simply use only science to be a shaman in a holistic view of knowledge and experience, you're not gonna win because the shaman's gonna beat you. I don't care how much science you say it is. For them, it's the magic of the mixture. So the idea, I think both views need to merge at some point in time.
And I was trying to make that statement. I was trying to make that near the end, and then even at the beginning, because I think there's a middle ground between the MD world and the naturopathic world. And the thing is that I think it's important to go into the details, to understand the mode of action of certain things. I have to go into the mode of action of certain things in the details just for a test, for my licensing. And it's hard. But when, people are saying that certain things don't exist, but yet I've spent thousands of hours studying this stuff. So wait, I'm studying these things that don't exist? I don't know, I take it just like, maybe it doesn't exist in their
Yeah,
world.
the
And
sound
maybe-
about white.
Maybe Jesse could expand on this thought that just popped in my head. Sometimes there are multiple realities. There's like multiverses. And that when we are thinking,
Yeah, we're in
so
their
when we
dimension.
manifest a certain reality. And if you're talking to someone else and they're not in complete alignment, then they're thinking a different reality. So Dr. Wolmer's reality may be true because she manifested that reality. And my reality may be true because I manifested it. So in a long way, maybe you're right, Daryl. There is room for both, but it may be in a kind of a multiverse kind of way that we're manifesting the reality because of our belief system. So maybe you can say something about that, Jesse.
Yeah, well, 100% that we do manifest our own reality. And right now, and there's room for medical doctors because you break a bone, your heart starts, failing, you got another heart that you transplant. Yeah, that's all that stuff is great. That we need that kind of stuff. We need doctors like that. But, I believe that, we do need to fix our trade. If they stop selling poison food, if they stop spraying food with pesticides, if they stop doing all these things, I think the need was for, science to try to figure out what's going on inside of the body when we actually know what's going on. We're being poisoned. We're being poisoned by preservatives. We're being poisoned by pesticides. We're being poisoned by frequencies. You even have it to
called crackery.
And you were telling you guys are manifesting the moon.
Yeah.
This is what happens.
Well, hold on, I got a better one for you. Why do people?
Because if we are healthy, they don't make money. You gotta have a chronic illness.
Come on now, help me out. I mean, your brain's gonna be shut down, your body's gonna be shut down. You become that
At least one.
You're supposed to die because your brain is like cortisol, it's not sending messages to your heart, your lungs, and your whole entire body. Your brain's not sending messages because you don't get up and pee on time. The bottom line is modern medical science has an ability to sentence you. I sentence you to death in 7 years. But the bottom line is, why is it that people with dementia living an additional 10 to 20 years?
I have a buddy who I have a missing link. His name is Papa Clean.
With dementia. This
This
is a cash cow.
And he had cancer throughout his body.
Gotta swipe the Medicaid.
He fasted for 30 days. He didn't I think all he did was drink water for 30 days. Then he went on an organic fruit and vegetable diet.
And they get the cut.
The oils up. We had one doctor, he's now, that was 10 years ago. That's a guy that I met. They gave him 4 months to live. He's been able to reverse all those cancers, all these things, all this stuff that was going on inside
Of course.
vegetables, and he's now 10
You find out what the
years
cancer
old.
eat, and you stop eating that shit.
This is where it comes to the
Whether
training.
it's sugar, usually
What Dr.
sugar.
Mann is saying is so
Cut off
valid
all the
because
sugar.
you change what you put into your body. You stop poisoning your body. You stop poisoning your body with, even bread. Bread is genetically modified. Your body doesn't recognize it as food. It automatically puts it into storage, protect itself. It doesn't process. That's why
Everything is genetically modified now. They're hybrids too.
Not to mention all the pesticides that are on it, but also oil. When you start cooking with oil substances, it makes some kind of compound that now is kind of harmful for your body. So it's it's really important, especially the vegetable oil and all these crazy oils. Those are all poison.
Can you stop? Stop that.
Use more organic olive oil, coconut oil. There's also debates now whether coconut oil is good or not good.
Yeah, but the thing is that life expectancy. I can see that some people have been able to reverse certain diseases, even cancers, by some sort of organic means, some natural means. Okay, but here's the problem. All right, it's not going to happen for everybody. And if you're a doctor, I think it happens for some.
The reason why it can't happen for anybody because of discipline. Not everybody can go 30 days without eating food. Not everybody can train themselves to just eat organic. Not everybody. People like their cakes. People like their coffees. People like their sugar.
But the life expectancy.
Even organic is not organic. Come on.
All right, and if you go back to, let's say, the 1860s, or even the 1700s or the 1600s.
Unless you know the farmers by first name,
so
you go there and see what the hell they're doing.
Sanitation was one of the big things before. Things were a lot more disease prone because of sanitation, the environment. We've got a lot of things that have done it. Like some of these drugs and some of these vaccines, like the polio vaccine, it was actually on the decline before they actually created the vaccine for it, right? I think a lot of this stuff is, I think a lot of the stuff that we call science, a lot of stuff that we call from the big pharma, they're taking credit for things that they shouldn't be taking credit for, and then they're promoting their poison. They're promoting their vaccines, they're promoting these things. I think this stuff is all poison. I think you can put the proper stuff into your body, like I done. 4.5 years ago, I stopped eating meat. I've had a older food since. I've been healthy. I still eat a little bit of sugar and sweets, and I got a little bit of sweet too. I don't drink a Slurpee every day like I used to. But I haven't had a colder food in 4 years. 4.5 years. I was sick once or twice every year. All I did was stop eating meat, started eating a lot more fruits and vegetables. I've always been a happy, positive person. I've always had a good mental attitude. But because my body had these toxins inside of them, it made me get sick. I don't get sick because someone sneezes on me and I need to get sick. I get sick because my body needs to release the toxins out of its body from all the poison and all the foods, the pesticides, the preservatives, breathing in whatever you're spraying in the air. My body needs to get sick. I know I'm going to get sick again. At least, I hope not, but it's probably going to happen because I'm still breathing toxic air. I'm still getting radiated by their radiation. Eventually, my body's going to have enough toxins that it's going to need to expel it to get sick. That's why we get sick.
All right. So let me give an example. All right, caveman. All right, we look at the bones and we can understand that they died from certain types of diseases and even had arthritis. All right, which is inflammatory. They were eating as organic or as natural as you can get, and they had low densities in their tribes. Okay.
But maybe they were just on a meat diet. Maybe they weren't eating fruits and vegetables. Maybe they weren't getting the vitamins that they needed in order to be able to not have these things grow. We don't know what they were eating at the time, but maybe they did. They just ate meat. Maybe they just killed animal and ate meat and didn't get nutrients.
Okay, let me give you an example. Yeah, maybe, but let's say you're a doctor, okay, Jesse, and the patient comes in, right? You're an MD, and obviously you've been going through the indoctrination. But you have this knowledge, and you're not sure if natural will work, and you're not quite sure that allopathic will work, all right? And you're at a crossroad, and you not only have a service to the patient to try to, because of the Hippocratic Oath to help them, but you also have to worry about a lawsuit. And you're probably more protected from the lawsuit by using allopathic means than, let's say, natural means, because the family members may go, well, our mother came in, she had cancer, and you said just, eat an all organic diet, and she died, and you didn't give her chemo. So now I get sued because I was trying to help them using a terrain theory, while I'm more protected by, by the medical mafia, as you say it, and my malpractice insurance if I use allopathic means, because it's what they call, science-based. that's their science-based. So, but the thing is, you see the problem that physicians that want to try to transition into that realm to try to help heal, they're opening themselves up to a lawsuit if it doesn't work.
You can tell them, so no matter what, if you tell someone to eat healthier, proper diet is, no matter what, they're gonna be healthier, they're gonna get their baby on pure whatever it is that they thought, but 100% they're gonna be healthy. There's no way to argue that that's not gonna happen. If someone's eating healthier, they're having a better diet, they're gonna be healthy.
Right, but they can still die from a cancer.
But they can still die from cancer, but what I'm saying is, every single medical doctor should, be telling people, look, we need to start eating better, cut out the sweet, cut out the coffee, cut out, this is number one thing that every single doctor, if you really cared about your patient, you should be telling them to eat healthier. That's the number one, that drain theory, but you need to put better stuff in. Now, the options are, we could do this with S, we could cause this, we could maybe could do some chemotherapy, but it's gonna burn your cells. You've got these options what you can take. The number one thing I'm telling you is to start eating healthier. These are other options that are presented to you. You can choose. This will get you away from getting any lawsuits because you're presenting them the options. You've been giving them, you're 100% honest with them, and you're telling them to eat better, which is gonna ultimately make them healthier.
Yeah.
Okay, my statement is this.
Oh shit. I think it finished. Yeah, because he erased someone's.
One second. The problem I'm having with both sides is, one side says eat healthier, be better. Okay. The other side says take this medicine, you'll be better. Okay. For every biochemical that we receive, or pill we receive, or shot that we receive, there's always that list of side effects. This could cause heart disease, this could cause this could cause that, you could die. You could die.
And some other labs, there was also a monoclonal antibody company, I don't remember the name of it, that was tied to DARPA. They were the antidote to the weapons program. So when you're making a weapon, you have to be able to neutralize it for your population or for your soldiers, so they don't get sick, right? So you're battle ready, right? In addition, if you know with some certainty what your adversaries are developing in their laboratories, you have to have some sort of antidote or some sort of vaccine against their biological weapons. So this leads to the covert development and partially the overt development of what was going on in Barrett's lab. So it's the main source is coming from his CV. Now, the origins, what was specifically was your question about the origins of HIV? Do you have a specific question?
Yeah, I might start with a comment and relation to that I heard years ago about HIV and get your take on that and in relation to VIV or bovine deficiency virus and then later talking about gag protein. Back in the late 80s, I was on a flight from Bangkok to Tokyo and sat next to an epidemiologist from Johns Hopkins who had been presenting a hypothesis at a big AIDS summit at the height of the HIV pandemic in Bangkok. And he gave me a copy of this article he published in the Johns Hopkins Alumni magazine, and his concern was about the epidemiology of HIV in Africa. That was his expertise. He said that the pathology of this follows very closely hepatitis B vaccine programs in Africa. And he was involved with that program and hepatitis B vaccine program. And he said the total reverse, specifically the epidemiology in Africa, is that these pandemic illnesses start in cities, and then they go along the highways into remote areas. He said HIV popped up in multiple remote areas at the same time that correlated with the with WHO and Pasteur Institute vaccine programs. And then traveled, then progressed from there into the cities. His hypothesis was that this resulted from a culturing of early HIV or early hepatitis B vaccine in cattle stomachs at the Pasteur Institute, which could have also been infected with PID. And also, there's other concerning issues that also early HIV-1 surfaced in gay communities in San Francisco and Miami that were also subject to these early HIV or early hepatitis B vaccine programs. His contention was that it was an accidental belief. But then, later in media, I've encountered people who have worked with AIDS research who came to us on the bar radio program those parts of a weapons program will be later.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about a weapons program. I'm sure that they've been doing weapons programs that are, with a lot of different pathogens, not just viruses, but, parasites and also bacteria. I've just been focused with SARS-CoV-2. There is an interesting thing that's going on with children getting hepatitis B now. There's an uptake, and so
The
maybe,
diabetes as well.
yeah, so maybe there is something that, to be said. I don't know of some sort of weapons program with hepatitis B. Now, it is true that a lot of HIV patients end up getting hepatitis. And, part of that is because of drug use, part of that is because of, certain, social norms that they're practicing at the time. So, but there does seem to be a correlation. I mean, we were taught in medical school that there's a correlation between hepatitis and HIV. It doesn't mean that it's causative. And you may have a group of people that have hepatitis before they have HIV, and you may have people that have HIV before they get hepatitis. Especially ones that get HIV first and they're not treated early with ART, they start getting a high viral load and they get a low CD count that's below 500, they are more susceptible to opportunistic infections and contracting, let's say, hepatitis. Now, what is interesting that you're bringing up with what was going on in Africa with Pasteur was that there was and I talked about this in my video today, there was a laboratory called, I believe it was called, what was it called? It was called
Detroit.
Stanleyville. I think it was called Stanleyville.
Yeah.
Out in the Congo. And this was happening around 1956 to 1959 for oral vaccines. They were doing an experiment to see if their oral vaccine manufacturing was safe and effective, right, for polio vaccine. They were making it from kidney tissues from chimpanzees that happen to have SIV. So there seems to be a correlation on the growth medium and the cell cultures, the monocellular cultures that they were putting in these flasks to grow certain types of viruses to create feedstocks for the vaccine. So it is very plausible based on just what Mikovits has mentioned, that the way they make certain types of vaccines, not all vaccines are made this way, but certain types of vaccines, especially ones that are using growth serums and tissue from animals that potentially could have viruses in them that have not been filtered out. And there's going to be a small percentage of the lots for vaccines that will have these replicated SIVs or VIVs or XIVs or whatever. So the theory is that HIV potentially was created because of a vaccine program on accident because of the way they were making the vaccine. So I think the biggest contribution I think Mikovits has to the whole SARS-CoV-2 thing isn't pandemic and all this stuff, but the very fact that she has seen in the laboratory through her experience that vaccines aren't safe at times. Doesn't mean all vaccines are bad. Doesn't mean that that certain lots can't be okay. But the way it's manufactured is flawed. And that I think that what Dr. Vollmer was saying about artifacts and certain things and that vaccines cause harm, I agree, and that some of these artifacts, which he calls artifacts, are literally viruses from the species that we are taking tissue from and growing viruses in to be able to make these live and attenuated viruses. But not all vaccines are live attenuated viruses. So, and I recently, within the last year and a half or so, I needed a polio shot when I was doing my research on the animals that we were injecting, to cause the GDS. So for me to be in the laboratory, this was a BSL-2 laboratory. So in that laboratory, I had to have an updated polio shot. Because the concern was that the animals in the laboratory might have polio, not contract. So as a precaution, I had to take the polio vaccine. Now, I was born in 72, so the vaccine that I would have when I was a kid would have been the attenuated live version, most likely as well. I don't remember it, but that's probably what happened. But not everywhere in the world, when they got the feedstock, used the chimpanzee kidney tissue to grow the vaccines. And it only happens if you use a certain that happens to be local to Congo. So this is part of the reason why they think that it starts in Congo through the polio vaccine program that came out of Staleyville laboratory. So, so I think there's adequate evidence to suggest that HIV jumped into humans through SIV, through the polio vaccine program in Congo. The problem is that there is tissue, lymph node tissue, that was in Scotland coming from some research that was going on at the time. And this tissue was preserved in Scotland, I think it's Scotland. And they were able to take a look at this lymph node tissue, and it happened to have, when they looked, it happened to have HIV. That tissue was harvested in 1930s. So it seems as though HIV was in the population in Africa, in that region, in West Africa, as early as the 1930s, from at least the samples that we have. The question is, how did it get there if it was there before the vaccine program? So I'm suggesting that you probably had multiple things going on. You probably had a zoonosis where you had some sort of jump between chimpanzee to humans because of eating the chimpanzee meat. But because they were inoculating millions of people from 1956 to 1959, that there was also an additional introduction of that SIV/HIV jump into humans because of the polio vaccine. And that you have some groups of HIV that's probably tied to zoonosis that happened before 1930. And you have some types of HIV or subgroups that happen to be coming from these accidental issues of vaccine production. I don't think that they did it on purpose. I think a lot of people in the kind of alternative community will kind of say, well, this must have been some sort of depopulation from the government and all this. And I don't think so. I just think that it was just medicine back in the 1950s was rudimentary in comparison to today, but it was advanced compared to what they were doing in the 1600s. So it's all. But I think you're right, Jack, that these tissues that they're taking from these different animals, they can harbor their version of a disease. And when we're introducing it into our population, especially in mass, like we're talking about millions of people being inoculated, it's setting the stage for gain of function. See, this is kind of like the big experiment that was going on in 1956 and 1959. That was the big experiment for gain of function, SIV to HIV, right? What Barrett did in the laboratory was something very similar, in the sense of serial passage, putting it into a lot of cell lines, a lot of animal models to get this thing, to get SARS-CoV-2 more lethal from the original chimera that came out of Dr. Shi's lab. So it wouldn't surprise me that some of the ideas that Barrett had to develop this serial passage technology came right from what they were observing from Congo.
That seems to fit very closely with what I recall, Hopkins, epidemiologist related. His intention was it wasn't on purpose, it wasn't active, that he said the early prototypical hepatitis B vaccines were cultured in animal stomachs in the past, for instance, because that was the quickest, most reasonable, cost-effective way to produce the prototypical virus vaccine. Once we got a proof of concept, then they went to a genetically developed vaccine. But his concern was the epidemiology of it, the correlation between the areas that had where HIV has surfaced in areas where there has been these hepatitis B vaccine programs, prototype programs that have been implemented, and as well within the U.S. He has, as I recall, the evidence that has with articles trying to be blocked, and he said that what would have had to happen was not put in one block, you have to have this kind of multiple ones, and then the precautions when they culture is that the catalyst that used for culture needs to be really fast.
Yeah, but then they go, that's fancy mathematics that I don't understand, therefore it has to be false. Well, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's false. Just mean it doesn't float in your blood. Her concept was very rudimentary. It was like almost like I was talking to someone from the 1600s. And I told her, you need the ACE receptor to control your blood pressure. And this is part of the reason why people were becoming hypotensive. You have these cases where people were dropping. Well, what happened was with SARS, when you had an infection, it's called the RAS system. The RAS system was in dysfunction. You couldn't create. What would happen is that your body would determine that you have low blood pressure, maybe hypovolemic or just hypotensive, and then normally what happens is your body detects that and then sends a signal to your kidneys to produce renin, and renin ends up to convert angiotensin into angiotensin 1 and 2. Well, when you need angiotensin 2 to constrict the blood vessels, so you have higher blood pressure because you're hypotensive. So you need to go into hypertension. So it's contracting the blood vessels, and in addition, it creates aldosterone that's telling the body to absorb sodium, so it increases the blood volume, and it would also be hypertensive to try to counteract the hypotensiveness that the body's detecting. So these patients their RAS system was in dysfunction. They couldn't self-correct. So they were hypotensive, or what is called orthostatic hypotension. They were standing. So because they were standing, they were losing blood pressure. They couldn't self-correct and then faint. So, and I'm like, and so when I was explaining to her that it's not that if you didn't have ACE, you couldn't control your blood pressure. And not only that, you've heard of people on hypertension medication, right? Where if you block ACE receptors or ACE2 inhibitors, which is the chemical that activates the receptor, so you have receptor blockers and you have actual protein blockers to prevent RAS system from activating so you don't increase your high blood pressure. But when she said that ACE receptors didn't exist, it's like you could not control your blood pressure if that was the case. And so the problem that I'm having with these terrain theorists is that even though I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal, but they didn't go through the educational process like an MD or a DO has to go through to understand the physiology. But yet they're making these broad statements that viruses don't exist. And they don't even have the rudimentary understanding to even have these statements. They just say, oh, it's never been isolated, but it was isolated. I mean, there's papers that have been published that show that it was isolated. Or there's been photographs made of SARS-CoV-2 docking on ACE2 cells in the lung. But she says, oh, because you had to stain it to make the picture, you modified it and therefore it's invalid. You can never win with these people because they don't allow for inference.
It becomes a circular argument.
And they blame it on us that it's our circular argument, not theirs.
Do you have a sense, Paul, that people like Ulrich from a form of mass formation psychosis, or might it be a deliberate narrative that they're pumping in there?
Well, I think it depends on the person. The person Kaufman, and he's a psychiatrist, right? Psychiatrist, right? You know, and he's older, so he didn't go through modern molecular biology and pre-med or even undergrad or even in medical school because he's post-genomic MD, all right? So a lot of the biotech that we're being taught in medical school didn't exist when he was in medical school, all right? So he doesn't have that foundation like I have. And I'll become a dinosaur soon, and you know, a new crop of students will have better tools. They're in homeostasis naturally. Their frequency is just right. Their water frequency is just right in the body. This is sounding more like Star Wars than like a 2 or a 2 week or a 4 week elective. So let's say he did a 4 week elective in internal medicine, all right, plus an 8 week block in the core rotation. All right, that means he's only had 12 weeks of training in internal medicine, but yet he's going to tell you how it is with viruses. See the kind of like, it's almost as if he was handpicked to be disinformation.
That's my impression.
That's Kaufman. All right, so I think Kaufman, so the point I'm making is it depends on the person we're talking about. Kaufman seems to be disinformation.
Coughing.
He was rolled out on Richie from Boston's channel first. Well, that's a bunch of flat earthers. Well, I mean, these are people that did not take calculus. These are people that are already programmed to not believe in any science or very little science or question, any level of academia. A lot of these people that listen to Richie from Boston aren't educated. So I'm not saying everyone's not educated, but it seemed as though it was a perfect rollout for Kaufman to feed the seed into these, what I call the dumbass truthers. These people that just buy in, they're credulous. They just buy into anything they hear. They hear this Dr. Kaufman saying that viruses don't exist, so it must be true. And he shows a picture of an exosome that looks like a virus, but doesn't explain that the chemical composition of that exosome is completely different than any virus that's been isolated. And then they say, well, that's true, but virus has never been isolated. And that means that there's no perfect isolate for viruses, and that there may be some artifacts within the fluid that's holding the isolate, which may be true. There may not be 100% pure, but when you start using sequencing technologies, you can see the artifact. And then they make these statements like, well, there's these researchers out there that randomly took animal tissue, cell cultures, and did a sequencing analysis and said they found measles and HIV and everything in that animal culture. And if that was the case, and these are common substances that are used in pharmaceutical manufacturing or in vaccine manufacturing that most people have come in contact with, then that would mean that everyone's going to be coming down with measles, everyone's going to be coming down with HIV. That's not the case, right? So where's the incidences? But yet they're saying that you can find it everywhere. Well, if it's found everywhere, then why doesn't everyone have it? See, for me, it doesn't seem a whole logic. And then what supports their argument is they say that's because most people, they're in homeostasis naturally. Their frequency is just right. Their water frequency is just right in the body. This is sounding more like Star Wars and like, in the Force, than medicine. Now, maybe medicine will get to that level, because magic, the difference between magic and medicine, all right, is a level of understanding,
Thank you.
like a caveman today would view us as magicians, right? They would look at us and like, you can do all these things, and it seems like magic, right? If we go into the future, if we were teleported in the future, we would consider ourselves, dinosaurs in terms of our understanding of medicine. And they would be the magicians, right? Because they're doing things that just we couldn't fathom.
Dr. Paul, I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
I mean, today's debate was kind of grueling to listen to because you had two different perspectives which both collided into the same area, and it was very, what's the word? The language for most of the guests out there that were listening, which means the listeners out there, was a little bit above grade level for most people, you know what I'm saying? And the problem I had with her was that she had only 2 years of medical school, and then she went to go to homeopathic studies. Now,
Well, I'll tell you the reason why.
I already got
It's hard. It's hard, and
It's hard.
it's damn hard, and she couldn't pass. She couldn't pass she couldn't pass through the testing. And so what happens is they drop down to a naturopathic means, and they think they know it all. But yet, if they knew it all, then why the hell didn't they pass the gates for MD? Medical school is extremely hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I aced Harvard. And Harvard is a pretty hard school. I also got a B, an average B at MIT. That's a hard school. And I'm telling you, medical school is way harder than anything I've ever done in my life. Now, maybe it's because I'm doing it doing it in my late 40s, early 50s, and maybe that's it. Maybe I would just find it easier if I was younger. I don't know. But medical school is hard. It's hard. It's grueling, and it sucks. And a lot of people just can't. You've been in the military. You've seen people that are just like, okay, they got what it takes to be an ADC, or they don't have what it takes to be an ADC, right? And that's medical school's kind of like that. Medical school's kind of like ADC training. And you just gotta suck it up. Enjoy the suck, and then eventually,
Oh my
you do that
God.
process, and then you start to
5 hours of
it doesn't mean,
this.
because that knowledge is wrong. It doesn't mean that we know it all. It doesn't mean that what we do know is correct.
Wow.
New knowledge will come in and then tell us it wrong. The community is all a cabal and all that. Like for example, if you're having an asthma attack and you're hospitalized, you better be given albuterol or you might die. All right? And I don't care how many berries and oats you eat, it ain't gonna solve the problem. You need albuterol. So
Right.
see, but if it wasn't for big pharma, albuterol would be it.
But then on the other side, they do say salt, water, and steam, but it takes longer.
Right. Well, I mean, it's not controlling. You have muscles around your bronchial tubes, right? And you need to relax them. So the
Oh, come on, give me a fucking break. I'm 57. I never heard about asthma attacks. Never.
So
Now everybody got it?
it?
Children, all the children got that
I think
shit.
it's a beta-2 agonist. I know.
Like the Undertaker, and you kept coming, and you kept coming. She couldn't keep pinning. She tried to pin and stuff. She couldn't do it. I call it time.
So what areas? The two areas that you think I failed were what?
The reason why I became a tie was because you blended the men together at the end. You showed how they work together.
Well, that's the truth. I really believe that because if you control inflammation on a lot of disease processes, you reduce the disease progression. And I think that's the beauty of naturopathic is that you try to control the inflammation. So, but that doesn't mean that allopathic medicine is all for naught.
Well, hold on. You have to remember. I mean, how do you beat an old shaman with modern medicine?
Yeah, but there's
Like in 20, 30 years, gonna say, oh, we was wrong. We didn't know that science. Ever since I can remember, backpedaling. Oh yeah, we killed hundreds of thousands of people, but we didn't know. Yeah, right.
there's something to be learned from the old. But there's something to be learned from the old shaman.
Science wasn't as advanced back then.
Even natural medicine, you gotta learn from old shamans because we've been through the years of knowledge and training. He's got training knowledge that came before him, and he's going to pass it on.
Well, here's another thing that naturopaths don't accept. You know, if you're going into surgery, you better hope that your anesthesiologist is a good anesthesiologist. You don't want to be awake, right? So if Big Pharma is so bad and so wrong with receptors, how the hell does anesthesiology work?
Well,
See the point?
You
See-
create the
and-
diseases.
But the thing is that platform that I was debating on, my style is that the moment they say something stupid, I interject.
right.
I can't, I'll tell you, I don't have the patience to wait for 10 freaking minutes to start bitching.
You are just spill your bullshit back. I mean, it's rare to sit back and watch you be a little patient. You know what I mean?
Right, so I'm only more, I'm kind of reactive when I see, that's why I want to parse each sentence out.
Right.
Because I don't believe, you know, the thing is that you're listening to something 10 minutes, forget the first 5 minutes, yes, and only focus on the last 10 minutes, the last 5 minutes. So, I don't know, but I do believe that there's a synergy between them. That it's very important, but I don't find that as a failure of the debate.
And the main point that was real was this: if the body is at perfect harmony without inflammation,
Yeah.
your levels are perfect,
Yeah.
you're not going to be sick.
That's not true, because you can still, if you're in perfect harmony, all right, you know, you're not sick.
Internal
And
organs.
you're perfectly in harmony, you know, and
That's
you
what they mix in their
are
DNA.
injected with HIV. You're in let's say you're injected with HIV, you're gonna get HIV, right? Or you have a higher,
Bullshit. Bullshit.
probabilistic.
If
You
your
have a much
pH
higher
balance
probability.
is out of whack, yes,
So, you know.
then
and
you'll
she's
get all
basically
kinds
saying,
of
no, it's just
diseases,
disrupting
not just
internal
viruses.
processes. Well, it is.
Gotta watch the
It's
pH.
disrupting the internal processes because it's causing infection. But she's not saying that the cause of that infection is because of the disruption of your. I mean, to me, it seems like I felt like I was talking to Harris, you know, the VP, no, the VP,
Okay.
you know, or VP, you know, it was like a word salad. It was like a word salad, you know. And I'm like, going, are you kidding me? So I don't know. I'm not gonna rewatch it. I'll replay it on different channels every time I watch it. But my memory is that every time I felt as though she was making a point, I wasn't able to rebut at the moment that she said it. So I lose momentum in being able to.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be. I don't know.
Being stage 4, you know, cancer or something, that you know, qualify for clinical trials. So there's a lot of problems with when you go into those studies. That quote would be definitive to prove, you know, certain pathogenic response to, you know, to a certain pathogen. Right? So, you know, some of these things that she's saying, it's just like you can't do. But the power of inference is science. I think that was kind of like an underlying theme that wasn't teased out during the debate. And that for people.
Yeah, 5 hours and you didn't tease out.
Just go through. I mean, it's disappointing that medical concerns don't concern you, but when something happens, it is going to be something that's going to be traumatic. It's going to end your life. And where are you going to turn to without no knowledge? Where are you going to turn to without knowledge? Think about it. You couldn't even stop your own child and slit their wrist. Why? Because you're so dumb. You didn't know what to do because you were your hand told you, hey, there's a whole other way, and there's a better way. You couldn't save your child from overdose because why? You're so dumb because you weren't listening to the man talking about what it takes to kill you. Or to stop this person from dying from overdose. You could ask him, you had a moment to ask him, and 12 minutes later, guess what happened? Your close friend decided to OD and right beside you. And you had a doctor right there. It's like, you're block, delete.
You're in the hamster wheel, 9 to 5, and 2 hustles. Give me a
I mean,
break.
hey, you know something? You thought it was troll. Block,
Oh my God.
delete. And is it that simple, done?
It's still going on.
I wish life was that.
Now this is live.
It's a little bit easier on Zoom.
4 hours and 49 minutes
Just like,
plus.
You know, it's I don't know, Jack. I mean, like, you know, you're still listening. Hopefully, you know, maybe you can chime in and tell me.
I'm
your
going, not
perspective
listening
on,
no more.
You know, you're with radio.
Have a
different people.
have a
Your
good
perspective
night.
On these trolls, you know, just and their retardedness.
I have good trolls around me. Things got very, you know.
So what do you think?
Poor thing.
Well, I think what you got here, it sounds like you got disappointed. But there are, yeah, there's just